Welcome back to Filling in the History. This is episode 42, and I am the amateur historian leading you through the forest of church history using the Joseph Smith papers as my machete, which is a weird metaphor. Let's forget I said that. But anyway, Doctrine and Covenants, section 115 through 120 is what we're going to be talking about today. This is a very interesting and perhaps short episode because we get section 115. Section 116 is actually not addressed in the Joseph Smith papers, but the materials are still there, so I sort of hacked together something of my own. And then the rest of the revelations all happened on the exact same day. So it's kind of an interesting set of revelations. So if you're wondering why so many, this is 6. It's because most of them were just given all in the same day. So we're just going to do them all at the same time. We're actually going to be starting this part with something very fascinating to me personally, anyway. So before we get into section 115, just some things that happened between more or less April and July of 1838. We're going to start with the trial of Oliver Cowdery. Now, I haven't been speaking too much about sort of the decline. I spoke a little bit about the decline, the beginning of the end of the relationship between Joseph and Oliver. But in this case, we're going to get an official meeting minutes. We're going to get charges. I'm going to go through this. I'm actually going to spend a little bit more time on this because Oliver Cowdery is there were 2 people involved in this from the start. And that has been Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. And so this is if you've forgotten, and by the way, this is minutes of a meeting on the 12th of April, 1838. And if you've forgotten, he is the main scribe for the Book of Mormon. So there were other scribes that helped, but he did the majority of what we read today was done by Oliver Cowdery. He was the second elder who saw John the Baptist and was part of that baptismal episode. He saw Peter, James, and John and received the priesthood under their hands, and also experienced the restoration of the priesthood keys in the Kirtland house of the Lord. So again, if you are to believe all of the stories, that means he's seen Jesus Christ. He's seen Elijah and Moses and Peter, James, and John and all the rest of it. So under all of this, we get this from the historical introduction. Despite these experiences, by 1837, Oliver Cowdery began to express displeasure with Joseph Smith's leadership of the church. As Cowdery noted in a letter included on the 12th of April minutes, a central issue for him and others who opposed Joseph Smith was the extent that the church and its leaders were involved in the temporal interests of its members. As another factor contributing to Oliver Cowdery's dissent, by summer 1837, he was deeply in debt, likely in part because he previously purchased wholesale goods for a mercantile firm he operated with Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon. In addition, as noted in his trial, Cowdery had insinuated since 1837 that Joseph Smith was guilty of adultery. So the minute structure that we have is charges brought and then a letter, official statement that Oliver Cowdery writes that explains everything that was just done here, and then we get the verdict. So just a little bit further into this, he did sell what he could to improve his situation, so we get this from the historical introduction. In October of 1837, Cowdery moved to Missouri, where he evidently devoted much of his time to improving his dire financial situation. He sold personal property in Jackson County, Missouri, and to bolster his emerging clerical and legal practice, he encouraged lawsuits against church members. Both of these activities were included in the High Council's charges against Cowdery on the 12th of April trial. So he sold everything he could. He sold property, and if you want to put it that way, he kind of sold out his friends. He says, "Look, I know a lot of you are upset. Why don't I'll make some extra money because I know a lot of people want to sue the church." So he did that against church members. So you can take that how you will. And it eventually ended in his excommunication. So we get this again from the historical introduction. Most of the testimony entered on Cowdery's emerging legal practice, his accusations that Joseph Smith had committed adultery, and his alleged connection to counterfeiters in Ohio. Joseph Smith testified twice during the trial. As a result of the testimony, Joseph Smith and others offered. Partridge and his counselors decided to excommunicate Cowdery, and the High Council concurred. So what I'm going to do is just light right into the minutes of these meetings here. So we get this from the minutes. I do hereby prefer the following charges against President Oliver Cowdery. First, for stirring up the enemy to persecute the brethren by urging on vexatious lawsuits and thus distressing the innocent. Second, for seeking to destroying the character of President Joseph Smith Jr. by falsely insinuating that he was guilty of adultery, etc. Third, for treating the church with contempt by not attending meetings. Yikes. Fourth, for virtually denying the faith by declaring that he would not be governed by any ecclesiastical authority nor revelation whatever in his temporal affairs. Fifth, for selling his lands in Jackson County contrary to the revelations. Sixth, for writing and sending an insulting letter to President Thomas B. Marsh, T.B. Marsh, while on the High Council, attending to the duties of his office as president of the council and by insulting the whole council with the contents of said letter. Seventh, for leaving the calling in which God had appointed him by revelation for the sake of filthy lucre and turning to the practice of the law. Eighth, for disgracing the church by lying being connected in the bogus business, as common report says. So that's counterfeiting money, basically. Ninth, for dishonestly retaining notes after they had been paid. And finally, for leaving or forsaking the cause of God and betaking himself to the beggarly elements of the world and neglecting his high and holy calling contrary to his profession. Far West, April the 7th, 1838, Seymour Brunson. So Seymour Brunson is the one that officially brings these 9 charges. So having said all of that, this is what I find interesting. Quote, it was not considered a difficult case, therefore 2, or 1, spake on a side, viz. Samuel H. Smith on the part of the church, and Jared Carter on the part of the defendant. So here's Oliver Cowdery. Here's all this stuff that he's done and that is going on. And at the end of the day, they're like, this seems pretty cut and dry. So we're only giving you one person on your side and one person not on your side. Like, this was not considered a difficult case, which I find this is so interesting to me. Then we get this, that the Cowdery letter that he wrote addressed a few items. And then he states this. He says, this attempt to control me in my temporal interest I conceive to be a disposition to take from me a portion of my constitutional privileges and inherent rights. I only respectfully ask leave, therefore, to withdraw from a society assuming they have such a right. So basically he's saying, if you guys are going to take away my constitutional rights, I'm out of here. So I find that also very interesting. And at the end of his letter, he says this, I do not charge you or any other person who differs with me on these points of not being sincere, but such difference does exist, which I sincerely regret. So he's very controlled. He's very thoughtful about this by saying, look, we feel differently about this. I get it. It's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. So there's really, and in reading the entire letter, there's really not a sense of anger. He's definitely being an attorney about this and being very professional. So we get a lot of testimony that follows of things that people say or that Oliver said or did. You know, a lot of people go off about, oh, I heard him say this and do that, and he wrote this and said this to me in a hallway or something like that. An alleyway, probably. Anyway, Joseph Smith did testify twice. So in this first one, he does say this in the minutes. It says, Joseph Smith Jr. testifies that Oliver Cowdery had been his bosom friend. Therefore, he entrusted him with many things. He then gave a history respecting the girl business, unquote. So footnote 21 on this says, it is unclear precisely what information Joseph Smith entrusted to Cowdery regarding Joseph Smith's relation with Fanny Alger. Later accounts variously claim that Cowdery performed a marriage ceremony between Joseph Smith and Alger, was called upon by Joseph Smith to mediate between Joseph Smith and Emma Smith after the relationship with Alger was discovered, or had been taught the doctrine of plural marriage privately, and took a plural wife contrary to Joseph Smith's instructions. So again, this is all, unfortunately, like kind of hearsay after the fact, but I felt like it is part of the story. It is part of this history. But there's a couple of things here. Did Oliver Cowdery actually perform the plural marriage between Fanny and Joseph Smith at all? Did it even ever happen? You know, yada, yada. Did he mediate between Joseph Smith and Emma? I don't know. We have some accounts here and there. but not anything really concrete. And then did Oliver Cowdery take a plural wife? And when Joseph told him not to. So there's a lot of stuff in here. It's really muddy. But it's there, and I wanted to point it out. It's part of what we have in the records. So Joseph Smith also stated that Oliver started to get hungry for property and money, which is the accused motive behind selling his Missouri lands. He's like, I'm not going to be poor. I'm going to do whatever I can to sell lands, make money. I'll do whatever I have to do, which is one of the accusations. All right. And also, what's really weird, Joseph later testified that Oliver Cowdery was involved in counterfeiting money. Now, where some of this comes from is the fact that the Kirtland funds in the previous episode, where I actually showed you what the money from the dollar bills, if you will, from the Kirtland Safety Society looked like. Oliver Cowdery was the one who went, I think, to Pennsylvania and got the printing plates for this money. So I guess it would follow that maybe he used that to counterfeit money. I don't know, but that's where that's not completely out of left field. He was kind of in charge of the printing plates for the money printing in the first place. Anyway, so that's part of the accusation from Joseph Smith. And then the meeting ends this way. After some remarks by the counselors, it was decided by the bishop and his council that the first, second, and third charges were sustained. The seventh was sustained. Also, the eighth charge was sustained satisfactorily by circumstantial evidence. The ninth charge was sustained. He was therefore considered no longer a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The decision was sanctioned by the High Council. And thus departs Oliver Cowdery from the church. Now, I'm going to say this again because I really want to include all of what the Joseph Smith Papers offers from this history. A lot of harsh stuff. You get Joseph Smith testifying against you twice, accusing you of things that he might not have done, like counterfeiting money. And that's kind of harsh. But the famous story after this is that this man, even with all of this stuff going on, does not deny his experience with the Book of Mormon. He still calls that story the truth. So you can take that as you will, but I find under the circumstances, this is why I spent so much time on this with such a big figure. He still stays true to the experiences that he had. He never actually denied those things happened. So that's very interesting. On top of this, the next day, we get the trial of Lyman Johnson, who is an apostle. He is excommunicated. The trial also included David Whitmer. So John Whitmer and W.W. Phelps were recently excommunicated for similar behavior that David Whitmer is accused of. So David is also excommunicated at this hearing by the High Council. That is two of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon, Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer, people who are involved in calling the 12 apostles, these two guys, in 2 days are both excommunicated, one day after the other. The following day, we get another trial against somebody by the name of Nathan West for his position on the word of wisdom. And this is part of the reason why David Whitmer was excommunicated as well. Nathan, on the other hand, was admonished. This is just about the word of wisdom, by the way. He was admonished, corrected, and he was sent on his way. So that is 3 very intense days of church court where these people are excommunicated. Very big names. And the very people who called the 12 who then turned around and excommunicated them for the reasons that we've already described. So anyway, I wanted to spend some time on that. And I wanted to spend some time on this. This is a license for David Lamoureux. And why do I know how to say that name? Is because it is the great-grandfather or maybe great-great-grandfather to a good friend of mine who shares the same name. So I was like, oh my gosh, how cool is that? Anyway, so if you're listening, love you, man. Good friend of mine. All right. Then we get an unpublished revelation. Yes. This is from the Scripture book, handwriting of George W. Robinson with a slash through it, of course, like everything else. This one is actually addressed to Brigham Young, and it says this. It's very short. Revelation given to Brigham Young at Far West, April 17th, 1838. Verily thus saith the Lord, let my servant Brigham Young go unto the place which he has bought on Mill Creek, and there provide for his family, until an effectual door is opened for the support of his family, until I shall command him to go hence, and not to leave his family until they are amply provided for. Amen. So basically, what had happened here is Brigham's family, including his wife Marianne, were very sick. They were in really bad shape. And basically, he was told to go home and take care of him. which he does. He doesn't show up in minutes of meetings after that, so he definitely did that thing. We do get a meeting on the 21st of April where they start to build up and reorganize the branches in Far West, since we've just excommunicated so many leaders, including Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer, and so they had to sort of rebuild from there. All right, next thing we get is section 115, which is the name of the church. I'm just going to bury the lead right there. So Paper's introduction for this, the earliest copy we get is from Joseph Smith's journal, or the scriptary book, as they called it. Handwriting of George W. Robinson, 3 pages is what it takes up, and all 3 have slashes through it. Otherwise, they're very clean copies. Shows up in the Elder's Journal periodical, and it's also in the later manuscript history that we get, which we're now in History of the Church, Volume 3, if you want to follow along that way. So, circumstantial introduction to section 115. The journal copy, the original copy, gives us this. Revelation given in Far West, April 26th, 1838, making known the will of the Lord concerning the building up of this place and of the Lord's house, etc. Now, what's really weird about this is, in a rare moment, this is the exact section heading we get in 1981 and in 2013. No differences there. But they actually use an introduction from an original copy. Usually there's some different wording there, but in this case, they use exactly what it is. The Elder's Journal that we get says an extract of Revelation given Far West, April 26, 1838. That's what they get. And the manuscript history gives us Thursday, 26 Revelation. I received the following revelation given at Far West, April 26, 1838, making known the will of God concerning the building up of this place and of the Lord's house, etc. So a little personal flair on the top, but basically the same thing. All right, historical introduction to this. We get a little bit more. It says this. The revelation was addressed to Joseph Smith, other church leaders, and all other members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which the revelation specified was the new official name of the church. The revelation enjoined the church's leaders and members to continue gathering to Far West, to sanctify the city through consecrated living, and to build the temple. The saints were instructed to begin work on the temple on the 4th of July and to build it according to a pattern that would be revealed to the first presidency. Further into this historical introduction we get, the plan for the saints in Missouri up until this time had been one of temporary settlement while waiting for a return to the center place of Zion in Jackson County. The 26th of April, 1838 revelation marked a change in Mormon plans in Missouri. Though the Latter-day Saints were not in Zion's center place at Independence and were not building the city of Zion, they were commanded to build up a city of Zion with a temple. The revelation concluded with a commandment to the saints to build up Far West and to establish other communities in the regions round about, as directed by their prophet. So this is kind of how the church operates today. So this is a major shift. Like, this is how we operate now, where what Latter-day Saints do is you move into a place, it becomes a branch, it becomes a ward, it becomes a stake. And then if you get enough stakes together, you build a temple. And that's kind of how the cookie crumbles in modern times. So let's get into the content and footnotes of this. Let's get the big one out of the way, which is a parenthetical phrase in this, by the way, I find funny. So in parentheses, for thus it shall be called, and unto all the elders and people of my church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So just as a parenthetical, hey, I'm going to call the church from now on. We get the official name. Kaboom. That is what it is. Given by revelation 8 years after the church is officially organized. Holy cow. And what's funny is this is not like on an anniversary or a conference. This is just a random day in April. So anyway, but there's the name of the church. So let's keep the name going and let's press for using it. So it says here, for thus shall my church be called in the last days, even the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And using the official name has been attention from the beginning. So I saw this in footnote 4. The first name used to identify the church that Joseph Smith organized on the 6th of April, 1830 was the Church of Christ. In 1834, a conference of church leaders changed the name to the Church of the Latter-day Saints, perhaps to avoid confusion with other churches named Church of Christ. On occasion, the two names of the church were combined as the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints. The Kirtland dissenters seem to have criticized church leaders for removing Christ's name from the formal name of the church. In a June 1838 letter, Thomas B. Marsh wrote that the dissenters claimed themselves to be the old standard, called themselves the Church of Christ, excluded that of saints, and said it not Brother Joseph and the whole church, denouncing them as heretics. Wow. Restoring the name of Christ to the name of the church may have answered this criticism. The name specified in the Revelation, a combination of the two earlier names of the church, began to be used in the early months of 1838. So recently, in much nicer ways, we're the LDS Church, we're the Mormon Church, we're this, we're that, we're the other thing. President Nelson says, no, we're the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That was given by Revelation, and we're going to use it. And it was intentional. A lot of people got kind of upset with that edict going out. It was kind of fun. Anyway, the text also gives us, let the city of far west be a holy and consecrated land unto me, and it shall be called most holy, for the ground upon which thou standest is holy. Therefore I command you to build an house unto me for the gathering together of my saints, that they may worship me. Footnote 11 for this says, in his 4th of September 1837 letter to the saints in far west, Joseph Smith began by blessing the name of the Lord who, quote, has delivered you many times from the hands of your enemies and planted you many times in an heavenly or holy place, unquote, implying that far west was a holy place. On the 23rd of July, 1838, Reynolds K. Hoon wrote a letter to Newell K. Whitney reporting, quote, it is said by some that Jackson County is where the Garden of Eden was. Far west is where Adam dwelt after he was driven from the garden. Adam-ondi-Ahman is where he built an altar and blessed his sons. This I have not heard from Brother Joseph, but expect it in his teachings, unquote. Which later on, you do, well, we're going to get to that in the next section, in section 116. So he does have a point there. So if you don't know, a teaching of the church, more or less, is that the Garden of Eden could have existed on this continent. We also do believe that the continent shifted and moved around. So it's not like it looked like this, that it was maybe one landmass, sort of a Pangea sort of thing. And that, yeah, like basically Middle America as we know it now could have been the Garden of Eden, that when Adam left that, he was somewhere in modern-day Missouri, and that Adam-ondi-Ahman, which is still there, is a place where he built an altar, offered prayer, and had a meeting with his children that we describe in section 107. So it's a little bit of a bold statement, but there it is. So that's what we get. The Revelation also says, verily I say unto you, let not my servant Joseph, neither my servant Sidney, neither my servant Hiram, get in debt any more for the building of an house unto my name, but let my house be built unto my name according to the pattern which I will shew unto them. Footnote 15 for this says, Joseph Smith and other Latter-day Saints had gone into debt to finance the construction of the temple in Kirtland, and eventually the temple had to be mortgaged. In 1838, Joseph Smith was deeper in debt than ever before. So basically the Lord's like, no more debt, bros, which I might have added the bros there. All right, so moving on, we get a little bit more from the Revelation that says, and again, verily I say unto you, it is my will that the city far west should be built up speedily by the gathering of my saints, and also that other places should be appointed for stakes in the region round about, as they shall be manifested unto my servant Joseph from time to time. For behold, I will be with him, and I will sanctify him before the people, for unto him have I given the keys of this kingdom and ministry. Even so, amen. Footnote 19 for this says, earlier revelations directed the church to purchase land not only at Independence and other areas in Jackson County, but also, quote, in the adjoining countries round about, unquote. The saints may have interpreted these revelations to mean that church members could venture to new settlements outside of Caldwell County. This expansion conflicted with the understanding of Missourians in neighboring counties that the Latter-day Saints would confine themselves to Caldwell County, and so the tensions reignite. And before we get into that too much, that is our first part for this episode. The trial of Oliver Cowdery, he's gone. David Whitmer, he's gone. We start talking about the official name of the church, and as you will see, because of all of this disruption, is one of the reasons why we get a rapid fire of revelations. And these are important ones. This is going to be the name of the church. This is going to be tithing. This is going to be like, how do we operate? Um, Big revelations. So stick around for part 2. All right, we're going to barrel right along with section 116 and what I'd like to call a new beginning. We have to sort of start over again here. We're going to start with a pay order. Super exciting, even has math on it. The signature's torn away as is custom, which means it's been done. But there you go. Exciting stuff. Then we get into a trial against a man by the name of Aaron Lyon on the 20th of April, 1838, which is just fantastic. So settle in for a little story here. I'm going to let the Joseph Smith papers do the talking. This is the historical introduction. Lyon was the presiding high priest in the church branch at the settlement of Goyman's Mill, about 8 miles east of Far West. One of the members living there was Sarah Jackson. She had moved from Illinois to Missouri in 1837 to settle with the Latter-day Saints, with the expectation that her husband would soon join her. When her husband did not arrive within a few months, she asked Lyon, quote, to inquire of the Lord concerning my husband, and what was the cause of his not coming, unquote. Sometime later, the recently widowed Lyon told her that he had received a revelation that her husband had died. In another occasion, Lyon told Jackson of a vision in which he saw her as his wife. Jackson initially expressed doubt about the validity of Lyon's vision, but the influential, much older man coerced her to agree to marry him. However, in November of 1837, before the wedding occurred, Jackson's husband arrived. Lyon attempted to excuse his actions by blaming the devil for giving him false revelations. Nevertheless, Jackson's husband brought charges against Lyon in an elders' meeting. The verdict of the elders' council, which is not known, was appealed to the High Council, and thus it is in the Joseph Smith papers because Joseph got involved in this. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't. I mean, this is 200 years ago, so hopefully we're over it by now. But this guy is widowed. His wife passes away. This woman comes to him and says, hey, I'm a young woman and my husband is not around. Could you please receive a revelation for me? And the guy's like, yeah, your husband's dead, and I have a vision that you're supposed to marry me. And right before they get married, the husband shows up, and yeah, scandal. Anyway, I just get a kick out of it. It's people are people, no matter what age, no matter what time you live in. Anyway, so Joseph and Sidney Rigdon had to sit in on this meeting because there was not enough people. So we get this. After hearing testimony from Latter-day Saints in the branch at Goyman's Mill, Rigdon argued for justice, and Joseph Smith argued for mercy. The council determined to retain Lyon as a member of the church but revoke his office in the priesthood. So more or less like, you don't get to be a leader anymore. Because technically speaking, they were never married or anything like that. He was just kind of like doing things. But at the same time, I would have understood him being fully excommunicated. So, it's in the past. That's what it was. But I got a big kick out of that one. That's just scandal. We then get a prospectus for the Elders Journal, basically a call to subscribe, and what the paper's all about. We get an editorial decrying the church's injuries and her enemies. That's an editorial in that same periodical. And then we get a discourse on the 6th of May, 1838, where Joseph, quote, delivered a discourse to the people showing or setting forth the evils that existed and would exist by reason of hasty judgment or dissensions upon any subject given by any people, or in judging before they hear both sides of the question, unquote. So he also speaks about people whining about money they lost, and also about the planets and the book of Abraham. So quite a wide variety of things to talk about. But basically just says like, hey, we got to be better than this. We need to hear both sides of no matter what. Just you got to hear both sides, and then you can make a judgment and make it final. And that's also, obviously coming from Oliver Cowdery being excommunicated, David Whitmer, people being disfellowshipped, people, Aaron Lyon, all this stuff. You got to hear both sides. We get a court declaration against Joseph Smith for $1,000 that he owed for some debts. This was for some mercantile goods, and it was past due. Joseph laid that on Oliver Granger to see it settled as soon as it was possible to do so. So that was Oliver Granger's sort of role as everybody was kind of leaving Ohio and coming to Missouri, into far west Missouri. We get the Elder's Journal, a little bit of a Q&A, which lays out some Latter-day Saint beliefs about the Bible. Do you believe in the Bible? What is the Book of Mormon? Question and answer. Do you believe in modern revelation? Is the canon closed? And even hinting at souls being taught the gospel in the afterlife, where Joseph sort of says, like, hey, yeah, if you don't hear it today, you might hear it after you've passed on to the other side, which is kind of interesting. And now we come to the time in which we say that Section 116 happens. Although I had to hack this together because there is no entries in the documents or anywhere else for a Section 116 of the Doctrine and Covenants, but it still exists there. So as a paper's introduction to this that I am putting together myself, there is no documents entry for 116. It is not found in Revelations and translations because it was never published in Joseph Smith's lifetime as an official canon. But we do get two copies that have the same wording. So we get Joseph Smith's scripture book, or the journal, if you want to call it that. And we also get it in the manuscript history of the church. Now, the circumstances around this, Joseph Smith and his companions are going up what's called Grand River, and they're scouting out locations for the saints to settle in. They came to a place that they decided to call Spring Hill. They also went somewhere else, and Joseph Smith decided to call it Tower Hill. He says, I'm going to name this place Tower Hill. Why? Because he says that they found an old Nephite altar or tower there. So they were kind of naming places for themselves as they went along. Anyway, they eventually strike land on this place that they term Spring Hill. And the wording for the portion that we extract this revelation from is this. This is from his journal. In the after part of the day, President Smith and Rigdon and myself went to White's Ferry, about half-mile from this place up the river, for the purpose of selecting and laying claims to city plot near said ferry in Davies County Township. And then it says 60, range 27 and 28, sections 25, 36, 31, 30. These are just the land, how they surveyed it out. Anyway, it was called Spring Hill, a name appropriated by the brethren present, but afterwards named by the mouth of the Lord, and was called Adam-ondi-Ahman, because, said he, it is the place where Adam dwelt, or where Adam shall come to visit his people, where the Ancient of Days shall sit as spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So basically they said, we're going to call it Spring Hill, and Joseph's like, actually, God has already named this place Adam-ondi-Ahman, and it's the place where Adam lived and where he will come again, as Daniel the prophet prophesied. So it's like, oh yeah. So they called it Adam-ondi-Ahman. And that's the best I could do. That's the extraction from the journal where you get Section 116. But not only that, but I also found this handy-dandy map here, which kind of diagrams out what the heck we're talking about in the river and where we're going up and down and all that kind of stuff. That's all here in this little map, which I found very helpful. So you can see where they kind of go up the river and so forth. All right. We then get a letter from Orson Hyde and Heber Kimball in England. They are having tremendous success with the people joining the church there. This is a very famous mission where many modern-day families can trace their lines back to the British mission of Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde. We get a letter from Don Carlos explaining how difficult it was to move his family, or the Smith family, and their setbacks along the way to move to Missouri from Kirtland, Ohio. So they had to uproot yet again. We get a set of licenses, a lot of licenses here, and then we get a meeting on the 28th of June to discuss and organize a stake at Adam-ondi-Ahman. And then after that, we get a series of revelations, one unpublished, and the rest of them are published, which all happen on the same day, on the 8th of July, 1838. And so because of that, we're going to skip down to the next part of this. So stay with us for part 3. Okay, for our final part today, we're going to be talking about 117 through 120, or as I like to call it, just the 8th of July, 1838. So we're going to start here out of order. I'm going to go in the order that the revelations were actually given. So what we're going to do is section 118, then an unpublished revelation, then section 119, section 120, and 117. But all of these were given on the same day. So I'm going to start with section 118. It says that our earliest copy is found in Brigham Young's journal, which is written in his own hand. We also get a copy of this found in Wilford Woodruff's Book of Revelations. We get it in Willard Richards' Pocket Companion and in the Manuscript History of the Church. Again, we're volume 3 of what they later printed off as the History of the Church. Circumstantial introduction to this for section 118, and for the rest of it, really. I'll just give it to you now, and you can just rinse and repeat this for the rest of it. The Brigham Young Journal gives us revelation given July 8th, 1838 at Far West Caldwell County, Missouri. Shew unto us thy will, O Lord, concerning the 12. And this is very similar to what we get in our modern section headings, so those don't change. But again, they're kind of taking from the original revelations what the section headings are in today's scriptures. The Woodruff and Richard books have the same introductions as well. The manuscript history departs a little bit, adds a personal flair to it, and says, also, I received the following, revelation concerning the 12, revelation given at Far West, July 8th, 1838. Shew unto us thy will, O Lord, concerning the 12. Answer. So it's kind of a question and answer. And then you get into the revelation itself. So I thought that was fun. Show us concerning the 12? Well, here's your answer. And there we go. All right, modern section headings, about the same, and follow what we've just read. So let's go to the historical introduction, because we have a lot of trouble in the high offices in the church, and we have a lot of cleaning to do. So the historical introduction gives us this. On Sunday, the 8th of July, 1838, Joseph Smith dictated 5 revelations in Far West, Missouri, each of which concerned church leadership or finances. One of these revelations regarded the quorum of the 12 apostles. The quorum had not been immune to the dissent and disaffiliation that plagued the church in 1837 and 1838. Apostles Luke Johnson and John F. Boynton renounced the church in December of 1837 and were consequently excommunicated by the High Council. In the quarterly conference held 7th and 8th of April, 1838, David W. Patton gave a report on the quorum and stated that he could not recommend Lyman Johnson or William E. McClellan. Lyman Johnson, who may have sympathized with his brother Luke, was excommunicated for various transgressions on the 13th of April, 1838. We talked about that earlier. McClellan, who had been troubled with the church and Joseph Smith for some time, was, quote, found in transgression in a church trial held on the 11th of May. Joseph Smith apparently began selecting replacements for disaffected members of the quorum before he departed Kirtland, Ohio for Far West on the 12th of January. For example, John E. Page and John Taylor had been designated as replacements for Luke Johnson and Boynton as early as January of 1838, and they are mentioned in this revelation. We also get this, however. Despite the turmoil in the church, most of the apostles remained loyal to Joseph Smith or repaired their relationships with him, and many were serving missions or were expected to serve in the near future. I like to argue that somebody like Wilford Woodruff, for example, I think was spared a lot of this because he was just gone. Heber C. Kimball, he was on a mission during all this, just, all this nonsense. He was going off and doing his thing. So, they were sort of spared that by being on mission. So this is going to be the same kind of thing we get for the next few revelations. It says, in Joseph Smith's journal, this revelation appears as the first of 5 revelations dictated on the 8th of July. Joseph Smith's journal entry for 8th of July introduces the first 3 revelations by stating they were read to the congregation that met earlier that day, but does not specify whether the 4th or 5th revelations were read at the same time. The 5th revelation, addressed to William Marks, Newell K. Whitney, and Oliver Granger, was copied into a letter the First Presidency wrote later in the day to Marks and Whitney. The letter states that the revelation had been received this morning. The order in which the revelations were copied into Joseph Smith's journal suggests that all 5 revelations were dictated on the morning of the 8th of July, apparently in the leadership meeting mentioned in the introduction to the first revelation. All right, so we got some replacement members here. As presented in Joseph Smith's journal, the revelation was a direct response to the plea to show unto us thy will, O Lord, concerning the 12. The revelation named new apostles, Taylor, Page, Woodruff, and Willard Richards, to replace those who had been removed. And it also directed all the members of the quorum to prepare for a mission over the great waters the following spring. All right, so let's get into the content and footnotes of this. The text gives us, and next spring let them depart to go over the great waters, and there promulge my gospel, the fullness thereof, and to bear record of my name. Let them take leave of my servants in the city far west on the 26th day of April next, on the building spot of my house, saith the Lord. Footnote 9 for this says, 4 days prior to this revelation, the church dedicated the cornerstones for the far west temple according to directions in a 26 April 1838 revelation. The revelation also instructed the Latter-day Saints to recommence laying the foundation of my house. On the 26th of April 1839, the apostles apparently intended to depart from the temple site in connection with this recommencing of the temple's construction. Though the Latter-day Saints were expelled from Missouri in early 1839, some of the apostles returned to the temple site to formally begin their mission as directed in the Revelation. Now, this is kind of a famous story that, under distress and this was a known revelation, the apostles still went back to the cornerstones to start their mission in far west, even though they knew they might get shot. But they did it. They were able to get away with it. Nobody caught them, and they started their missions. So that's kind of a famous Brigham Young story. He was part of that as well. Also, just to kind of point through this, too, is the idea that the Far West Temple is one of the only ones that has been left unbuilt. So, and this is amateur historian, but as of 2024, so this is 2025 that I'm recording this, as of 2024, the church has actually bought the Kirtland Temple. So that's kind of back into the possession of the church. And then you also have the Nauvoo Temple was burned by an arson. That's been rebuilt, and that is an operating temple now. And so now you have Far West, even Winter Quarters, I think they dedicated a site for. That has a temple on it now. Far West is still a bunch of stones in the ground that is maintained as a historical site, but we have not built that temple back. So it's still just kind of sitting in the state that it was in. It was never actually built. All right, anyway. We get the calling of new men to replace those who had left. You get this from the text. Let my servant John Taylor, and also my servant John E. Page, and also my servant Wilford Woodruff, and also my servant Willard Richards, be appointed to fill the places of those who have fallen, and be officially notified of their appointment. So, 2 future presidents of the church are called here. Just wanted to point that out. Footnote 11 says this. The calling of the new apostles may have been related to the apostolic mission over the great waters commanded in this revelation. John Taylor, an English native who lived in Upper Canada, had been instrumental in the conversion of the English-Canadian missionaries who accompanied Apostles Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde on their mission to England, and who had helped arrange their original contacts there. John E. Page was completing a successful mission in Upper Canada and was expected to travel to Missouri with a large group of newly converted Latter-day Saints. Wilford Woodruff, a member of the First Quorum of the 70, was serving a successful mission in New England and had spent a few months preaching in the Fox Islands off the coast of Maine. Woodruff and others saw great significance in preaching the gospel in and gathering the house of Israel from the islands of the sea, as the Old Testament prophet Isaiah had prophesied, and as Joseph Smith's revelations had commanded. Willard Richards had joined Apostles Heber C. Kimball and Orson Hyde on their mission to England and continued proselytizing there after his companions returned to America. So that's where these men come from. But yeah, Wilford Woodruff, John Taylor, these people become presidents of the church. And if you don't know, it's Joseph Smith and then Brigham Young and then John Taylor and then Wilford Woodruff. So pretty significant what this revelation is. So that's all you get from the revelation that we're going to give you. And then we get an unpublished revelation. This is part of the Newell K. Whitney papers. It is not from the Isaac Grew collection. So this is in the actual church history library, not at BYU. And it is in the handwriting of Newell K. Whitney. It is given on the same day as sections 117 through 120, but this one was just never canonized. We also get a Frederick G. Williams copy of this, which kind of makes sense considering what it is. So the text reads this. I'll just read the whole thing because we read unpublished revelations. It says, Revelation given July 8th, 1838 in Far West, Missouri. O Lord, what is thy will concerning W. W. Phelps and F. G. Williams? Verily, thus saith the Lord, in consequence of their transgressions, their former standing has been taken away from them. And now, if they will be saved, let them be ordained as elders in my vineyard, church, to preach my gospel, and to travel abroad from land to land and from place to place, to gather mine elect unto me, saith the Lord, and let this be their labors from henceforth. Amen. So you have been demoted And on the, we also get a docket here on the lower left page. So it's kind of upside down. That just kind of dockets what this is. So that is the unpublished revelation, basically saying you guys messed up. You no longer hold your positions, and you are to serve a mission and just be elders now. So that is that. Now, we get into section 119. This is the tithing revelation that we get. The original copy that we get is an individual page with Edward Partridge's handwriting on it. The docket with tithing, just the word tithing, is written on the back. We get a Newell K. Whitney copy in his own hand with some text on the other side, which is kind of fun. There is another Edward Partridge copy. And then we get a copy in the 1844 Doctrine and Covenants, which I won't share, but also the manuscript history. This is volume 3 of the history of the church, as we've said before. So what's the introduction to this? Well, it's kind of a question and answer. So the original version that we have, the most original copy from Edward Partridge, says, Far West, July 8th, 1838, a revelation. Question, O Lord, show unto thy servants how much thou requirest of the properties of thy people for a tithing. Answer. And then you get your answer. We get the same thing for Newell K. Whitney's copy, Edward Partridge's copy, so it's all pretty much the same. The manuscript history gives us this. It says, And the same day I inquired of the Lord and received the following, July 8th revelation on tithing. Given at Far West, July 8th, 1838, which was also read in public. O Lord, show unto thy servant how much thou requirest of the properties of thy people for a tithing. Answer. You get the answer. There's no change to modern section headings, so we'll leave those alone. And then we get this from the historical introduction, because we've had money problems for years. An 1831 revelation on the laws of the Church of Christ directed the Latter-day Saints to consecrate their property to the church bishop, and then manage stewardships of property or other responsibilities assigned to them. Church members attempted to follow this program of consecration and stewardship in Jackson County, Missouri, but their attempts ended when they were driven out of the county in 1833. In the early and mid-1830s, Joseph Smith and other church leaders in Ohio engaged in a number of business and banking ventures, most of which ultimately failed. The troubled situation of church finances was compounded by the nationwide panic of 1837 and the ensuing economic recession. During this period, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon incurred several $1,000s of debt. And just to kind of put this into perspective, just financial history of the United States, there used to be a ton of recessions and depressions and panics in the 1800s until in the 20th century, the Federal Reserve came up with a unified United States dollar. It wasn't until the 20th century that they did that. So let's try 2%. We get this from the historical introduction. It says, in September, the church published an appeal from Bishop Newell K. Whitney and his counselors in Kirtland, calling on church members everywhere to bring their tithes into the storehouse, to relieve church debts, and to help establish the community of saints in Missouri. While this general request did not include recommended donation amounts, in December of 1837, a committee composed of Edward Partridge, the Bishop of Zion, Isaac Morley, the first counselor to the bishopric, and John Corll, the appointed keeper of the Lord's storehouse, proposed that every head of household be asked to annually donate a certain percentage of net worth, which with the percentage based on church needs for the year. To cover anticipated church expenses for 1838, the committee proposed a tithing of 2%. The committee believed that such a program would be in some degree fulfilling the law of consecration. So the original number was 2, just so you know. So the interpretation of surplus property was a little bit lacking. I got a kick out of this one. The resulting revelation called for the Latter-day Saints to consecrate all of their surplus property and thereafter to pay 1/10 of all their interest annually. Robinson, who was present at the leadership meeting, may have transcribed the revelation as Joseph Smith dictated it. Now, so just to pause here for a second. In the revelation, you get, hey, after you give all your surplus property, then you're going to give 10% of your income. That's the tithing to this day. So that's where we get into. We're just going to talk about the first part of it here. The revelation was read later that day to a congregation of Latter-day Saints. Over the next few weeks, church members responded to the revelation by consecrating surplus property. According to the 27 July entry in Joseph Smith's journal, quote, "Some time past, the brethren or saints have come up day after day to consecrate and to bring their offerings into the storehouse of the Lord. They have come up hither, thus far, according to the order of the Danites." Unquote. Officers in the Danite Society had attended the leadership meeting in which Joseph Smith apparently dictated this revelation, and members of the society were now helping gather the consecrated goods. The success in collecting surplus property apparently did not last long. John Correll, the keeper of the storehouse, recounted in 1839 that the Danites, quote, "set out to enforce the law of consecration, but this did not amount to much," unquote. Brigham Young, who was serving in the pro tempore church presidency in Zion, recollected several years later that church members were sparing in what they considered surplus property. Makes sense. I don't know if that's surplus. Maybe I'll keep that. Maybe I need that, which I find just very enlightening, very engaging. So, yeah, you never know when your surplus property will come in handy. Footnote to this introduction says this, because there are some questionable accusations about finances at the time. So, Ebenezer Robinson, the clerk for the High Council, recounted decades later that he was antagonistic toward Joseph Smith, that the High Council approved an annual stipend of $1,100 for each member of the presidency. That when church members heard of the decision, they, quote, lifted their voices against it. That the High Council therefore revoked the decision, and that Joseph Smith dictated the revelation on consecration and tithing a few days later. As these decisions are not documented in extant High Council minutes, Robinson's veracity regarding this episode is questionable. So he's trying to say, hey, they only did 10% because Joseph wanted a salary, but we have no proof for that. So that could just be him talking. It could be real. Who knows? We don't know. So let's get into the content and footnotes of this. The revelation says this: "Verily thus saith the Lord, I require all their surplus property to be put into the hands of the bishop of my church of Zion for the building of mine house, and for the laying of the foundation of Zion, and for the priesthood, and for the debts of the presidency of my church." Footnote 2 for this says, property was already considered surplus if it could not be put to good use by the owner. In a council meeting held 26th of July, 1838, it was agreed that the first presidency would keep all their properties that they can dispose of to their advantage and support, and the remainder be put into the hands of the bishop or bishops, agreeably to the commandments and revelations. Brigham Young later shared his understanding that church members were asked to donate property such as land and cattle that they could not, quote, make use of to advantage, unquote. So basically, if you've got like 15 cows and you really just don't need 15 cows, then you would consecrate the surplus to somebody else. And that's kind of I would love to be in that situation. Like, hey, I've got 10 Ferraris. I don't need all 10. I need 9, but not 10, right? So surplus property. That's me being the amateur historian. All right, so the famous law of the tithe. Here we go. It says, "And this shall be the beginning of the tithing of my people. And after that, those who have been thus tithed shall pay 1/10 of all their interest annually. And this shall be a standing law unto them forever for my holy priesthood, saith the Lord." So let's get a little confusing with interest, shall we? So footnote 7 to this says, 2 weeks later, Partridge wrote a letter to Newell K. Whitney, the bishop in Kirtland, in which Partridge explained that the saints are required to give all their surplus property into the hands of the bishop of Zion, and after this first tithing, they are to pay annually 1/10 of all of their interest. That is, if a man is worth $1,000, the interest on that would be $60, and 1/10 of the interest will be, of course, $6. Thus, you see the plan. So, a 6% was a common interest rate at the time. Both Ohio and Missouri statutes fixed interest rates at 6% if no other rate was agreed upon. So, we don't do interest, but apparently that's the original part. Is like, not only is it a 10th, but you also have to pay interest on it because of the annualness of it all. So, thank heavens we don't do that, because that's just a mess, and who wants to do taxes like that? Anyway, the last portion of the revelation that we get says this: "Verily I say unto you, it shall come to pass that all those who gather unto the land of Zion shall be tithed of their surplus properties, and shall observe this law, or they shall not be found worthy to abide among you, And behold, I say unto you, if my people observe not this law to keep it holy, and by this law sanctify the land of Zion unto me, that my statutes and my judgments may be kept thereon, that it may be most holy, behold, verily I say unto you, it shall not be a land of Zion unto you. And this shall be an ensample unto all the stakes of Zion, even so, amen. So footnote 10 for this says, this passage echoes the phrasing in Deuteronomy that refers to the law of Moses, which the Israelites were commanded to live by in their promised land. So a lot of parallels there. So there you go. There's the law of tithing, and thank heavens we don't have to do a freaking like interest rate based on this state or whatever. What a mess. Anyway. All right. So now we get into section 120, and this is a very brief section, and it is what I like to call the Council on the Disposition of the Tithes, because that is what the church calls it every time we do an audit report for General Conference. So let's get into it. The earliest copy we get is the Scriptury Book of Joseph Smith. This is the handwriting of George W. Robinson. It is a very clean copy with a slash, like you do. Frederick G. Williams gets to have a copy, and then we also get a copy in the Manuscript History of the Church. So the introduction for this says, the earliest copy that we get, revelation given the same day, July 8th, 1838, making known the disposition of the properties tithed as named in the preceding revelation. Once again, we get the same introduction in modern section headings, and this is the same introduction for the manuscript history. And there's no difference in those modern section headings. It's all pretty much the same. So Freddie's copy is a little different, but not by much. It says revelation given the same day on the disposal of the property of the church. So a little different there. Historical introduction gives us a little more. It says, the third revelation directed the Latter-day Saints to consecrate surplus property to the church as the beginning of the tithing of my people, and then to donate 1/10 of their interest annually. Robinson's head note for the fourth revelation featured here states that it was given in reference to, quote, the disposition of the properties tithed as named in the preceding revelation, unquote. This short revelation directed that the donated property be managed by a council consisting of the First Presidency, Bishop Edward Partridge and his counselor in the Zion bishopric, and the Zion High Council, all acting together under the inspiration of God. Whereas the first three 8th of July revelations included the journal entry for that day were read to the congregation of saints at the worship services later that day, it is unclear whether this fourth revelation was also read at that time. On the 26th of July, 1838, the council that was called for in this revelation met as directed. So they actually did get together and do their thing. So there you go. Yeah. So the revelation is very short, so I'll just read it to you. This is content and footnotes now. Verily, thus saith the Lord, the time has now come that it shall be disposed of by a council composed of the first presidency of my church, and of the bishop and his council, and by my high council, and by mine own voice unto them, saith the Lord, even so, amen. That's the whole thing. Footnote 2 for this says, it is unclear whether the High Council included the pro tempore Zion presidency at Far West, which ordinarily presided over the council, or whether the first presidency was to preside directly over the body of 12 counselors, as the presidency had in Kirtland. When the Zion High Council met on the 31st of August, 1838, Sidney Rigdon and Hiram Smith presided directly over the 12 counselors. The Zion presidency was apparently not present. This was the last High Council meeting recorded before Joseph Smith was taken prisoner by Missouri officials in November of 1838. And this council is referred to every year. There's always a church audit report that is spoken in the council, in the general conference of the church. And it says, based on the revelation of the disposition of the tithes, they are actually referring to section 120. So that is quoted every single year in a general conference, and the church sort of makes an accounting of how they spent their money. All right, now we get into section 117, which will be, I believe, our last for the day. Like I said, a little out of order. I'm just going in the order that it was given in the Joseph Smith papers, which is technically the original, so whatever. Anyway, the earliest copy we get is actually a loose paper in the handwriting of Edward Partridge. And the phrase, the only thing that's really weird about this is that we get a phrase struck out, which is, and whatsoever remaineth, let it remain in your hands. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But otherwise, a very clean copy. We also get a copy in a letter to William Marks and Newell K. Whitney, which is written by Newell K. Whitney, which is in the hand of him anyway. That's his handwriting. We get a copy from that's in the hands of James Mulholland. Willard Richard's Pocket Companion gets one copy. Joseph Smith's Scriptory book is also a copy, but apparently the Edward Partridge one came first. We also get one from Lydia Dribble, probably in her own hand, but that's the copy that we get, is Lydia Dribble's copy. And we obviously get one in the manuscript history of the church. So, the most original introduction that we get for this from the Edward Partridge copy says, a revelation given at Far West, July 8th, AD 1838. The Mulholland copy, the journal copy, has the same thing, and we actually don't get any introduction on Lydia's copy, so she just slides right into that. We do, in the letter to Marks and Whitney, we get Far West, July 8th, 1838. President William Marks and Bishop Newell K. Whitney, N.K. Whitney, G&T, which I believe granted, or gentlemen, we send you by the hand of Brother Oliver Granger a revelation received this morning, which reads as follows. So, hey, in your mailbox is a revelation. There you go. The manuscript history gives us this. Revelation to William Marks, N.K. Whitney, and O. Granger. And I received the following revelation, given to William Marks, Newell K. Whitney, and Oliver Granger, and others, Zion, July 8th, 1838. No differences in modern section headings here, so we'll just light right into the Joseph Smith papers. So the historical introduction gives us this. The revelation directed Marks and Whitney to relocate to Missouri before winter. Once in Missouri, they were to preside over the saints in their respective callings, Marks as president of the church in Missouri, and Whitney as a bishop in Adam-ondi-Ahman. Granger was to return to Kirtland and continue to act as an agent for the First Presidency in settling remaining business affairs, thereby allowing Marks and Whitney to move to Missouri sooner. And he was mostly unsuccessful there. This is actually a point of sadness in Oliver Granger's life later on that he records, that he tried his best and to dispose of things in Ohio, but he just felt like he kind of failed. But I think he did the best he could. I think he's fine. And it is a little personal, so we get this from the historical revelation. The revelation, which is somewhat personal in nature, may not have been read during the worship services on the 8th of July, as were at least some of the other revelations dictated that day. Joseph Smith and his counselors in the First Presidency included a transcript of the revelation in the letter they wrote to Marks and Whitney and encouraged the two men to follow the revelation's direction. And a very sad final note, Partridge was present when the revelation was dictated and probably made the copy shortly thereafter. This is the latest possible copying date is the 27th of May, 1840, which is the day he died. So that's not to go too far into the future here, but this is maybe the last thing that Edward Partridge did before he passed away. So content and footnotes for this, the text reads, and this is the struck out part. It says, and whatsoever remaineth, let it remain in your hands. That is struck out. But it says, for what is property unto me, saith the Lord? Let the properties at Kirtland be turned out for debts, saith the Lord. Let them go, saith the Lord. And whatsoever remain, let it remain in your hands, saith the Lord. So, hey, man, sell your land, pay off your debts. That's what Oliver Cowdery did. We didn't appreciate it when he did it, but now we have a revelation to do it here. Footnote 4 for this says, Marks was engaged in selling Mormon property in order to pay the debts of Joseph Smith and Rigdon. So he was already kind of in process of it. Revelation also says, is there not enough room in the mountains of Adam-ondi-Ahman, or upon the plains of Oleah-Shenaiah, or in the land where Adam dwelt, that you should not covet that which is but the drop, and neglect the more weighty matters? So, could the amateur historian be wrong? Well, I think so. Footnote 7 for this says, here and later in the Revelation, Mulholland's copy uses the spelling Adam-ondi-Ahman. According to John Corll, when Joseph Smith applied this name to Spring Hill, Missouri, he gave the English interpretation of the name as, quote, the Valley of God, in which Adam blessed his children, unquote. Now, I am still of the opinion that many meet God is also a good English interpretation, but I'm not going to argue with Joseph Smith on this, so we'll just call that the amateur historian doing his thing. We also get some notes here from the Book of Abraham, and just so that you know, the Oleah-Shenaiah, that the Book of Abraham says that Shenaiah means the sun, and Oleah is the moon. So just so you know, this is the valley of moon sun or moon and sun. But that's some interpretations of those words from the book of Abraham. Text says this about William Marks. Let him reside in the midst of my people in the city far west, and let him be blessed with the blessings of my people. Footnote 13 to this says, Kirtland President William Marks was apparently intended to replace Thomas B. Marsh, who was serving as the pro tempore president of Zion. And just as a, just so that we're all on the same page, this is a picture of William Marks, and this is a picture of somebody depicting William Marks. And those are both from, well, the first one is accurate. The second one is Your Humble Servant, and that was a shameless plug for 6 Days in August, which came out last year. Anyway, moving on. We don't need to get into that stuff. Anyway, we get a chastisement for N.K. Whitney, for K. Whitney. It says, let my servant N.K. Whitney be ashamed of the Nicolaitans, and for all their secret abominations, and all of his littleness of soul before me, saith the Lord, and come up unto the land of Adam-ondi-Ahman, and be a man bishop unto my people, saith the Lord. Not in name, but in deed, saith the Lord. Now, the punctuation, I got a kick out of man bishop, but anyway, that's probably not how you're supposed to say it. Footnote 15 for this says, 10 days earlier, when a stake of Zion was organized in Adam-ondi-Ahman, Vincent Knight was appointed the bishop pro tempore. It may have been intended that Knight, who had previously served as a counselor to Bishop Whitney in Ohio, would be replaced by Whitney when Whitney arrived, but that never happened. And then we get the blessing for Oliver Granger. This is where we'll end it off. Therefore, let no man despise my servant Oliver Granger, but let the blessings of my people be upon him forever and ever. Amen. And a sad footnote here about Oliver Granger. It says, Granger may have been looked down on by others because of his partial blindness. He had lost much of his eyesight in 1827 from exposure to the cold. Don't make fun of blind people. That's not very nice. And apparently the Lord sort of bolsters him up and defends him. So that's what we have for this episode today. This is a gargantuan moment. I keep saying that over and over again, but you have Oliver Cowdery getting excommunicated, you get the church reorganized, and then you have the name of the church, tithing, the disposition of the tithes, right? How do you organize stakes? All of that is here. So these are major things that we use very, very actively in the church today. So there you have it. And also a shameless plug to a movie that I was in. But anyway, enough of that. Thank you very much for joining us again. And as we move forward, we're going to be getting into a little bit further into some doctrinal issues and eventually into Nauvoo. So we're coming towards the end of this year. Glad you're staying with us. And until next time, this is the amateur historian once again saying, record your life, keep a journal, keep your records, because your life is worth remembering. Have a good week.